All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. It is awesome to have you with us on our live stream. Thanks for tuning in and joining us wherever you are and whenever you're watching this. We are just glad to have you along for the ride this morning. In fact, this morning we are starting a new series. And I have to admit that I'm maybe a little nervous about this one. A little nervous about going there. I mean, as a preacher, there are some subjects that are easier to talk about than others, right? So we just finished a series on prayer, and, in a lot of ways, prayer is easy to preach about, right? Because, prayer is kind of like mothers and apple pie, right? I mean, everybody loves mothers, and everybody loves apple pie, and, as followers of Jesus, we know we should pray, and so we talked about prayer. But we're done talking about prayer. Now, we're not done praying. In fact, as we get into this series, maybe we're going to need to pray more and pray harder, okay? But today we are starting a new series. We're calling it Survival Guide, and we're going to be talking about marriage and about relationships and how you can move your marriage from surviving to thriving. And you're saying, Darcy, why would you be nervous about that? What is so hard about talking about relationships or talking about marriage? Why is that difficult? I mean, what could possibly go wrong talking about relationships and marriage? The reality is that this might get a little personal. In fact, for some of us, this might get to meddling in your life, or at least feel that way. It's kind of like the story of the two little old ladies that were sitting together in the little country church listening to a young fiery preacher, and the preacher started talking about the sin of stealing, and the two little ladies shouted, "Amen, brother, preach it, brother." And then the preacher started condemning the sin of lying, and the ladies stood up and they waved their hankies. That's right, brother. Tell it like it is. Preach it, brother. And then the preacher got talking about the sin of gossip. And the ladies got very quiet. And then one turned to the other and said, "Well, now he's quit preaching and he's got to meddling." So meddling is when the preacher gets talking about stuff that's a little too close to home to be comfortable. And there's nothing closer to home than marriage and our relationship with our spouse, right? But marriage is something that we've got to talk about. In fact, it's incredibly important that we talk about this right now. And not just because marriage is good and that marriage is God's idea, but because a good marriage is hard work. And a lot of marriages are finding it really hard, especially right now. A few months back, I stumbled across an online article with the title, "Pandemic Pressure Cooker is Driving More Couples to Seek Advice About Separation and Divorce." And the article started with the story of a woman named Tara, and it said that Tara found herself stressed and frustrated during the COVID-19 lockdown last spring. And like millions of Canadians, she was struggling to work from home, help her 6-year-old daughter with virtual learning, and manage the anxieties associated with the unknowns of the new and frightening virus that was seemingly taking over the world. What she didn't realize, though, was that her life was about to change permanently. Even as the world was shutting down around me, my marriage was shutting down as well. I don't blame the pandemic. I think maybe it would have happened anyway, but I think COVID sped up the process. It sort of put us in a pressure cooker that maybe we wouldn't have been in without the pandemic. So in August, after 10 years of being together and 5 years of marriage, Tara's husband asked her for a divorce, and she said her life as she knew it was over. The article goes on to talk about how since the pandemic began, law firms have seen a 40% increase in the calls from couples seeking to end their marriage. The isolation, the claustrophobia of being confined at home, the financial stress, the family pressure, due to working from home and maybe schooling from home. All of that stuff just intensifies the stress that many marriages are already under. It amplifies all of the problems in a relationship. But it's not just the pandemic that's leading people to hit the eject button on their marriage. Part of it is what people saw growing up, what people experienced in their families as children and as young people, and the lack of healthy role models and good experiences that they had in this whole area of relationship and marriage. And the truth is that increasingly fewer people have been around healthy marriage relationships, romantic marriage relationships that have really been functional and healthy. And many young people, especially young people, have never seen a marriage like that up close and personal. They've never really witnessed a marriage that has kind of endured in a healthy way for years. That was probably not the home that they grew up in or the family that they were raised in. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but one of the reasons why being a follower of Jesus and being involved in a church is a huge advantage is that I think there's probably a higher chance, at least for some of us, if we're involved in a church, there's a higher chance of seeing some healthy marriages up close. And that's not to say that every marriage in a church is healthy, and that's not to say that I can speak for every church, but I know that when I look around our church, well, at least when there's people in the building, I think we got a number of married people here this morning, but not too many. Got one couple sitting here in the front row. They're the only couple sitting in the front row. In fact, they're the only ones sitting here at all. But anyways, when we do have more people here, I look around and there's lots of marriages that have stood the test of time. People that have been married for a long time, a long time. I mean, longer than most of us have been alive long time. I mean, some of you have been married longer than dirt. I mean, you've been married a long time. And that's not to say your marriage doesn't have problems or that your marriage hasn't had challenges, because a good marriage is not a problem-free marriage, okay? You can have a good marriage and there's still probably going to be some issues there. All of our marriages are flawed. But Jesus makes a difference. And we're going to talk about how he does. But, I think back to my mom and dad's marriage. They were married for 42 years. And they loved each other and they loved Jesus, but theirs was not a problem-free marriage. There were some bumps, lots of bumps. But they loved Jesus. And I know for a fact that made a difference, but it probably saved their marriage. Aileen's mom and dad were married for 59 and a half years. I got a chance to witness their marriage for many, many years, and they loved each other. It was wonderful. My grandparents were married for, and I didn't figure out the exact date, but over 60 years. Aileen's grandparents were married for a phenomenal 69 years. And Aileen's grandma was so cute. She was 5 foot nothing. I don't even think she was 5 feet. She might have been like 4'9" or something. And little old German, very stern German lady. And when Grandpa passed away and we were planning his funeral, and I had the privilege of leading that service, she said to me, don't make him sound perfect. And she had a crooked finger. Aber he had his faults, And I'll never forget that. He had his faults. But a good marriage is not a problem-free marriage, but it can still be a good marriage. But the reality is that many of us grew up in a family where it was far more than just a good marriage with some problems. We grew up in families where the marriages maybe didn't stick together, or if they did stay together, you wouldn't say that it was healthy, or that the couple was in love, or that it was even good. A lot of times they just kind of tolerated each other. A lot of times that relationship was really dysfunctional. So what happens when you grow up in that kind of environment? Well, kids learn what they live. And when the pressure is on, oftentimes you default to your training. You act out what you learned in your family, and you end up doing what you saw your mom and dad doing. You end up doing what you had modeled for you. And now it doesn't have to happen, but it often does. And then also all of us come into our marriages with baggage. We've got skeletons in the closet. We've got, piles of dirt that we've just kind of swept underneath the rug. All of us have icebergs in our lives, icebergs in our past. And you know what? Those icebergs can sink our marriage. Now, I know that, most people get married, kind of feel about their marriage like the people that built the Titanic felt about the Titanic. It's unsinkable. It's the latest and greatest. It's the best. And that's how people think about their marriage. They think about their marriage as being unsinkable. Other marriages might get shipwrecked, but you know what? Not ours, baby. Ours is going to be fine. Ours is going to be good. And then their marriage crashes into the iceberg that we all have in our lives. And sometimes that's enough to sink your marriage. But there's another reason why marriages are crashing. There's the pandemic, pressure cooker, the lack of healthy role models and good experiences. But there's also the fact that our culture has an aversion to pain and an addiction to pleasure. We don't tolerate pain. And you know this stuff. I'm not saying anything new here, but our culture just has a low threshold for pain. We want to be happy. We expect to be happy now. And that means that you don't have to hurt too bad. You don't have to experience too much pain before you want it to stop. You want out. And it used to mean that I do meant I do, and I'm going to keep on doing whether I like it or not. And so, people would soldier on in marriages that were difficult. But those days are pretty much over. And understand, I'm not saying that, soldiering on was necessarily a good thing. It wasn't good because I think sometimes people just settled for difficult marriages instead of doing something about it, investing in their marriage, getting help, working on it, trying to improve things. They just thought, well, this is marriage. It's not good. I guess this is what it is. Well, that's not a good solution. Another thing about it not being good is because sometimes people, especially women, stayed in marriages that were not just unhealthy, but were actually harmful. Harmful to themselves, harmful to their children, relationships that were physically or emotionally abusive. And, they would think, well, I married the guy, so I got to stick with him. This is my lot. And sometimes the thought on the other side was like, hey, I married you, so I can treat you like dirt. Well, when I say our culture has an aversion to pain and addiction to pleasure, and that's a problem, I'm not talking about harmful marriages. I'm not saying that women or men should just soldier on in an unhealthy marriage or in a harmful marriage. Tony Newhoff has just written a great book called Before You Split. And she's a family lawyer that does a lot of mediation and working with couples that are walking through divorce. But she's also a pastor's wife. And I think that's one of the most unique combinations I think I've ever heard of, a divorce lawyer who's also a pastor's wife. But she's written this great book called Before You Split. And I think it's a good read for any couple, not just couples who are struggling, but right at the beginning of the book, she makes an important distinction that we need to understand. She says, a harmful marriage is different from an unhappy marriage. And we need to understand the difference. An unhappy marriage is where maybe you've drifted apart from your spouse, where maybe you're stuck in endless conflict. Maybe even one of you has been unfaithful, or there's been some serious damage to your relationship in that way, and it's painful, and it's frustrating, and you're angry, and you're deeply unhappy in your marriage relationship. That's an unhappy marriage. A harmful marriage, though, is an abusive marriage. It's where your partner is behaving in ways, or maybe you're behaving in ways that are violent and dangerous and toxic. And friend, if that's your marriage, then you need to protect yourself, and you need to protect your kids, and you need to get help. In fact, you're probably going to need to step out. You're going to need to step away, because you can't probably stay under the same roof if you're dealing with a toxic and a violent situation that's just dangerous and destructive in its behavior from your spouse. So don't tolerate abuse just because you said, I do. Don't think you're stuck there. Now, sometimes it's hard to see the line. It's hard to see the line between a harmful marriage and an unhappy marriage. And sometimes your friends and your family may or may not be much help in helping you figure that out. In fact, sometimes I think you probably need to get help from a professional counselor to sort through some of these issues. But here's what I'm trying to say. Here's the thing that I've noticed, and I think you've noticed it too, because all you have to do is read the headlines on People magazine or whatever the entertainment magazine is at the grocery store checkout counter, because increasingly it seems that you really don't need a good reason to end your marriage. You can just be unhappy. Maybe you're just bored. Or maybe you've been drifting apart as a couple, and your happily ever after has kind of turned into ho-hum. And so, for a lot of people, that's enough to call it quits. In fact, they would say, if you're not happy in your marriage, it's probably because you married the wrong person. You married the wrong person. You need to find a different person. You need to start over. You need to reboot your marriage. And if you're stuck in a marriage that's less than satisfying, then it's keeping you from being fulfilled as a person. It's you're not going to be self-actualized, or whatever it is they say. You're not going to become the person you're supposed to be. You're not going to find yourself if you're stuck in an unhappy marriage. So if your marriage is getting in the way, you should walk away. That's what they say. And in fact, our culture encourages that. It celebrates that. And instead of doing the hard work to save your marriage, it's supposedly easier and better just to walk away. Except here's the thing. It's never easy to walk away from a marriage. It's not, especially if you have kids. It's never easy to walk away from a marriage, because you're not leaving all of the pain behind when you leave an unhappy marriage. You're not leaving the pain behind. In fact, it's going to take years for you to rebuild your life. There's going to be very real financial ramifications and relational implications and life implications when you walk away from a marriage. So it's never just easy to walk away from a marriage. And in fact, Tony Newhoff would say, I've worked with a lot of clients who said, if I'd known what I know now, I would have tried harder to save my marriage. Because it's just not simple to walk away. So what can you do to save your marriage? That's why we need a survival guide. That's why we need to talk about this, because in the middle of a pandemic pressure cooker that's amplifying all of the issues and all of the unhealthy experiences that we have and our lack of role models that we have, for so many of us, and then in a culture that says, don't bother, in a culture that says it's not worth it, what do? Well, we need a survival guide. And to be honest, I don't want to just settle for saving my marriage. I just don't want to survive marriage, survive being married. I mean, that sounds terrible. Survive marriage? I think I want something a little bit more than that. So how can we actually move the needle in our relationship from just surviving to thriving? Even in a pandemic, even in a culture that doesn't do unhappy or doesn't do difficult. Well, it's something Jesus talked about 2,000 years ago that I want us to look at this morning. And some of you are saying, good, finally, we're going to talk about Jesus and something he said. Because up till now, it's been a little hard. Well, of course, Jesus never said anything controversial, right? Jesus never said anything tough or difficult, right? Jesus never challenged cultural norms. Jesus never challenged our personal preferences, right? I'm being sarcastic in case you're missing that, okay? It's just really hard sometimes to know if people are picking up what I'm throwing down, because I can't hear you. So laugh a little louder, please. It would encourage me. But Jesus said something that if we will take it to heart and if we will put it to practice in our lives and in our homes, I actually believe it has the power to not only save, but transform your marriage. Shift the needle from survive to thrive. Because 2,000 years ago, just a few hours before his betrayal and his crucifixion, Jesus sat down with his followers and he gave us the foundation for enduring relationships. And not just marriage relationships, for all relationships. But something that, in fact, I think is intensely important, especially for marriage relationships and family relationships. And if you want to build a marriage that is healthy and happy, I think this is where you really need to start. If you want to take your marriage to the next level, to shift it from surviving to thriving, I think this is where you need to start. If you're not married but hope to be married, this is where you need to start. And even if you're not married and don't want to be married, if you want to have friends, if you want to have a meaningful relationship, this is really where you need to start. And friends, it's so simple, I'm actually afraid that we're going to miss it. And if you've been part of church for a while, for any amount of time, I know this is something that you've heard, this is something you've read, this is probably something you've quoted, and it is so easy to skim over this and think, yeah, I've heard this before, I've read this before, I know this. It's so easy to look at this and go, come on, Pastor, give me something new. Give me something deep here. I need something deep, something that's really going to help me, because I've got this, I've heard this, I know this. Well, do we really? Do we really understand this? Because I don't think we can get into the other stuff about how to build a great marriage unless we really dig down and lay the foundation for how we think about marriage and how we think about relationships with this very famous but very basic teaching of Jesus. And if two people in a relationship will grab hold on to what Jesus says here, I think it can transform your marriage. So here it is. One verse from Jesus. Okay? Are you prepared? Prepared to be impressed? Here we go. One verse. Jesus said, so now I'm giving you a new commandment, and here it is. Love each other. Love each other. You want to shift your marriage from surviving to thriving. If you want to save your marriage, if it's in a difficult place, the magic words from Jesus, this is Jesus' secret sauce for a successful marriage. Love each other. Wow. That's deep. You know, I went to Bible college for 4 years. You can probably tell, right? I worked hard on this message. But hey, you know what? This is not me saying that. This is what Jesus is saying. He's saying, now I'm giving you a new commandment. He's saying, you know what? You've already got 10 commandments. You've already got, hundreds of other commandments and laws that are just extrapolations of those commandments. Extrapolations. That was the word of the day a few Sundays back. Remember extrapolations? Well, you got dozens, if not hundreds of commandments. But here's a new one. Love each other. Wow. And maybe you're saying, whoa, wait a minute, Jesus. I don't understand. Jesus, you don't understand. In fact, Jesus, you were a single guy, right? Jesus wasn't married. What does Jesus know about this stuff? That's the problem, Jesus. We don't love each other. That's the issue. In fact, we hardly tolerate each other. And yeah, maybe there was a time way back when I thought she was really cute and I was her hunka burning love. I mean, those days are long gone. It's over. And now you're commanding us to love each other? For real? Like, what's up with that? What are you talking about? How does that even work? But listen to what Jesus says here. And friends, if we are not careful, we will miss this. And I need to thank Andy Stanley for pointing this out. Because if we're going to understand what Jesus is saying here, I think we need to slow down. We need to read carefully. And we need to realize that Jesus takes a word that we normally use as a noun and uses it as a verb. So I was never really good at English, grammar, that sort of stuff. So let's review. What's a noun? Okay, what is this? Grade 5 English? Grade 5? I don't know. What's a noun? A noun is what? A person, place, or thing, right? And what's a verb? A verb is an action word. It's something you do. And so Jesus takes a word that we normally use as a noun and he makes it a verb. You see, when we talk about love, we typically talk about love as a noun. It's a thing. It's a feeling. Feelings. Nothing more than feelings. It's in fact, it's an uncontrollable feeling. Love is something you fall into in our culture. Oh, I'm falling in love. It's like, you fall into a mud puddle, you fall into a hole in the ground. It just kind of happens. You fall. You can't help yourself. And friends, it's not hard to fall in love. If you got a pulse, you can fall in love. It happens all the time. In fact, some of you have fallen in love with people you haven't even met. You turn on the television and there they are. Your heart goes pitter-patter. You're in love. Never even met the person. But if you can fall in love, you can also fall out of love. And if love is a thing, if love is a feeling, if love is this uncontrollable feeling that just kind of happens, well, you know what? If you fall in, you can fall out because feelings fade. Feelings fade. And the reason that so many marriages are so unhappy is because they've fallen out of love. The feelings that they once had have died. That spark that made you want to marry the guy or made you want to marry the girl in the first place is deader than an old dollar store battery. It's just flat. It's gone. And then you see somebody new and your heart jumps a little bit and there's that spark. And you're like, ooh, there's the feeling. I'm in love with that person. And so we typically talk about love as a noun. But Jesus makes love a verb. And Jesus says, if you really want to be in love, then you need to quit treating love like a noun and treat it like a verb. Love, a verb, and action, okay? Love each other. It's a verb. You see, in that verse, Jesus isn't commanding us to have feelings. And no doubt, make no doubt, this is a command. Jesus is making a command here. He says, this is a new command. It's an imperative. This is something that you must do as a follower. But you can't command a feeling. Jesus isn't commanding us to have feelings. Jesus is commanding us to take action. So here's the thing. The foundation for a thriving marriage and the foundation for staying in love is to make love a verb. To make love an action. In fact, can we say that together? Even those of you that are in the room this morning, can you just humor me? Can we just say this together with me? Just say, make love a verb. Make love a verb. In fact, if you only remember one thing from this morning, and, it's probably going to be my alien's grandma with her little crooked finger going, Aber, he had his faults, But aside from that, if you can remember one thing, remember, make love a verb. We need to make love a verb. Friends, here's what you need to do if you want to save your marriage. Here's what you need to do if you're going to start moving the relationship or the needle in your relationship from survive to thrive. You need to make love a verb. Something you do, not just something you feel. You see, the goal is not to recapture a feeling. Now, that's not to say that feelings aren't important, but in a marriage relationship, feelings are the caboose of the train. They are not the engine. Now, maybe it started off as the engine. I mean, there was some feelings there. That's probably why you married the guy, married the girl in the first place, right? But they can't stay as the engine. They can't stay there. And it's not that they're not important. It's because they don't have the power to pull the train where it needs to go. So we got to understand that feelings are actually the caboose. They can't be the engine. But when you start making love a verb, when you understand that love is not just a feeling, but love is actually serving, love is caring, love is helping, love is being thoughtful and kind, then not only does your husband or your wife begin to feel the love, but you'll actually start to feel the love. Because here's what every happy couple knows. If you choose to love, your feelings will follow. If you choose to love, your feelings will follow. And in fact, that's a principle that Jesus talked about in Matthew chapter 6. He was teaching about money and possessions, but he said, remember the verse, where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be, right? Basically saying whatever you invest in, or whatever you choose, there's going to be that emotional connection. You're going to be tied to that. And friends, it's the same in our relationships. If you choose to love, if you choose to invest, if you choose to make love an action, your feelings will follow. But Jesus didn't stop there in John 13:34. He says, now I'm giving you a new command, love each other. And, I think we got a verse here. Yeah, there we go. This whole new commandment business, if you know your Bible, you know that this really isn't a new command. In fact, this comes up in Leviticus, which is the third book in the Old Testament. So this is actually kind of an ancient thought, this idea of loving your neighbor, loving others. So here's what makes it a new command is this. Jesus says, just as I have loved you, you should love each other. That's what really sets us apart as a new command. It's the example of Jesus. He's the one that sets the bar. He's the one that shows us how to love. In other words, Jesus says, you want to know what love in action looks like? Watch me. Look at me. Jesus is saying, I don't want you to take your cue from culture. I don't want to take you to take your cue from, watching rom-coms or watching those celebrity shows about love and marriage. Don't take your cue from that, and don't even take your cue from your parents or your family. Even if they had a good marriage, some of them had good relationships. Some of them just survived. Some of them were stuck, but some of them even had good relationships. But don't take your cue just from your family or from your parents. Jesus says, when it comes to love, I want you to take your cue from me. Take your cue from me. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Do you know what happened just before Jesus gave this command to love as he had loved? Well, right before this, he had washed his disciples' feet. Do you remember the story? They're in the upper room. They're celebrating the Passover. This is the night before Jesus' betrayal and crucifixion. And Jesus, the master. And friends, we need to understand that this is Jesus, the Messiah. Jesus, the Lord. It says he took off his robe. He tied a towel around his waist. He poured water into a basin, and he began to go around washing his disciples' feet. These 12 guys that had walked all over Jerusalem that day. These 12 men with their feet that probably hadn't had a pedicure for weeks, if ever. Jesus begins to wash their feet. And then Jesus gets to Peter, and Peter's like, no, you're not washing my feet. And Jesus said, no, I need to wash your feet. And Peter's like, you're not washing my feet. And Jesus said, yes, I'm washing your feet, because if I don't wash your feet, you've got no part of me. And Peter goes, oh, if that's the case, then wash all of me. Jesus said, no, I'm just washing your feet, buddy, okay? And after washing their feet, it says that Jesus put on his robe again and sat down and asked, do you understand what I was doing? And he says this, since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. In fact, I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done. Do as I've done. Friends, that's love. That's love as a verb. That's action kind of love. It's serving, it's caring, it's being kind, it's being humble, it's being willing to do the dirty work. Do you know what I've discovered about marriage? And Aileen and I have been married for 33 long years. Maybe that came out wrong. It's not like it's been long. Actually, it's gone by in a flash. 33 long years. No, I just realized even the past few days, it's been, it's like I'm getting old. It's like been married for 33 years. But here's what I've noticed. Most of life and most of marriage is very ordinary. It's very routine. We marry for the fireworks. We marry for the excitement. Oh, we're going to live together for the rest of our lives. Woo-hoo. Well, you know what? It's pretty ordinary, a lot of life. It's just day in, day out, routine, mundane kind of stuff. And every day is full of little moments where somebody needs to pick up the towel and pour some water into the basin and wash some feet. Every day. Now, maybe instead of washing feet, maybe you need to wash the dishes, or wash some clothes, or wash the car, or clean the toilet. I mean, there's all of these just kind of ordinary, everyday moments in life. Every day is another magic moment where you get to humble yourself and serve and care and express common courtesy and kindness to one another, simple affection, taking a moment to listen, taking a moment to care and to pick up your socks, your underwear, and just care for each other. And friends, when you love that way, you feel the love. You feel the love. And when you pour in 33 years of learning to do love as a verb, and I got to admit, this is something I have had to learn. In fact, this is something I still need to learn and to work on. I mean, Aileen got this long ago. I mean, that's one of the reasons I married her, because I knew she'd gotten this. She knew love was a verb, but something I've had to work on. But if you will work on love as a verb, it's not hard to know love as a noun, because the feelings will follow. But you've got to be willing to put the work in. You've got to be willing to put on the towel and pick up the basin. The same conversation that Jesus had with his disciples just a little bit later, he kind of repeats himself. And I'm going to close with this. John chapter 15, verses 12 through 13, Jesus says, "This is my commandment." Again, he's back to this commandment. He's underlining and highlighting this. He says, "Love each other in the same way I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends." Wow. And of course, we know that about 12 hours later, Jesus did exactly that. He laid down his life. And friends, in that moment, Jesus wasn't giving his disciples a marriage seminar. He wasn't trying to do anything more than just talk to his followers about following. But if Jesus' words are for all of us who are in a relationship with each other as followers, do you see the potential? Do you see the significance? Do you see the power that these words have for people that are in the most intimate of relationships, the relationship of marriage? You say, "Darcy, yeah, but you don't know my husband. You don't know my wife. You don't see what happens in our home. You don't hear the hurtful words or the cutting remarks or the criticisms. You don't see the anger or the selfishness or the pride." And again, I just need to say, you need to discern if your marriage is unhealthy or unhappy. Is it unhappy or is it harmful? And if it's harmful, if it's abusive, then you need to seek help. But friends, if it's unhappy, even if it's seriously unhappy, I want you to ask yourself this morning as we close. Am I using love as a verb or a noun? Am I using love as a noun or a verb? And don't ask, is she using love as a verb or a noun? Is he using love as a verb? No. Ask for yourself. Am I using love as a noun or a verb? Because if your marriage is going to survive, and friends, if it's going to move from just surviving to actually thriving, this is where it needs to start. And it needs to start with you. And maybe some of you will be brave enough and honest enough to admit this morning that you've not been using love as a verb. You haven't done a whole lot of foot washing. You've definitely not been laying down your life either. And friends, if that's where you're at, if you've just been convicted in your own heart this morning, I want you to do three things. Number one, I want you to repent. I would invite you to come to Jesus and say, "Jesus, I'm sorry. I have not been obeying your command to love." And it is a command. Your command to love my husband and to love my wife. I haven't been picking up the towel and basin. I haven't been laying down my life. The second thing I want you to do is I want you to apologize to your wife or to your husband, to your spouse, and say, "Hey, I haven't been using love as a verb. And the third thing I want you to do is I want you to ask Jesus to help you learn to pick up the towel and to pick up the basin. I mean, especially now in this pandemic season that we're in, this pandemic pressure cooker. In fact, for some of you, I would encourage you to do number 3 before you do number 2. Before you go and apologize to your spouse, you need to pick up the towel, pick up the basin, pick up your socks, begin to put some of this in action. And then as you're doing it and they start looking at you funny, like what's got into you, you have to say, listen, I'm really sorry, but I've not been using love as a verb. And I'm going to do that with Jesus' help. For some of us, you maybe been putting in the work. In fact, maybe you feel like you've been doing most of the work in your relationship. And if that's where you're at, if you're in an unhealthy, unhappy relationship, and you feel like you're putting it in, and your partner is not, then maybe you need to have a conversation. And it's probably not a conversation that you can have just one-on-one. It's probably a conversation that you need to get some help having. Maybe you need to go see a counselor. And friends, I would say marriage counseling is a great thing. It's a good thing. It's an investment in your marriage. And friends, it is way cheaper and way less painful than a divorce. Get some help. Have that conversation. Don't settle for a marriage that is stuck just surviving. Because Jesus doesn't want your marriage to survive. He wants your marriage to thrive. And so do I. Let's pray. Jesus, I pray that you would help all of us to learn to love one another. Not just to use love as a noun, but to use love as an action word. To pick up the towel in the basin, to serve, to care, to honor. Help us in this most intimate relationship of marriage, I pray in your name. Amen. Let's sing this final song together as we close.
Be filled thank you so much for joining with Generations Church and our worship experience today. If you need prayer, our hosts would love to pray with you. You can just press the prayer button and they will just stay online for a little while longer. And may God bless you and your families this week in whatever season you find yourself in. Take care.